CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Modest advances with the much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village.
Our other headlines, a show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever military air exercise, led by Germany.
Italy's Silvio Berlusconi, one of the most colourful and controversial figures in European politics, has died at the age of 86. Ukraine is reporting heavy fighting along parts of the front line, hours after it said it had recaptured a fourth village in the southeast of the country.
Kyiv is pushing ahead with its long-awaited counter-offensive, but the territory it claims to have retaken is relatively small. Both Kyiv and Moscow are said to have suffered losses. Our correspondent Yolo David has the story.
Each battlefield gain is lauded, however small, a reason to show Ukraine's colours. A soldier confirms his unit from the Marines' 35th Brigade has control of Storozhev village. In all, Ukraine's army chiefs claim several villages in southeast of the country have been retaken. Blahodatne and Neskushne are in the Donetsk region and nearby Makarivka.
I'm authorised to declare the liberation of Blahodatne village near Velika Novosilka. It was done by fighters from the 68th Jaeger Infantry and the Alexei Dovbush Brigade. The operation was successful, and they were supported by units from our frontline defence forces between Avdiivka and Kherson.
The ugly remnants of war are left behind. Villagers who stayed carry on with their daily lives, while the Marines move on to the next battle to the south and east of Ukraine. A lot rides on this counter-offensive for Ukraine. Some Western equipment is being used, but the lack of air cover will worry military leaders. Fighter and helicopter pilots have to be resourceful when they engage their enemy.
We wait for weapons to be delivered. We'll receive them, but we'll have to check, to train with them, and to use these rockets during training. Then we'll be able to use them in combat, I hope.
Meanwhile, divisions remain on the Russian side of the conflict. While the country's official soldiers are awarded medals and applauded for their action in Ukraine, there have been months of public bickering between the leader of Wagner's mercenary group and Russia's Ministry of Defense. To control all its professional soldiers, conscripts and volunteer militias, Russia is introducing central contracts and Kremlin authority over all their fighters in Ukraine.
A military order confirms that by July the 1st, contracts must be signed that determine all our activities. The order grants the right to all defenders to fulfil their military duty. All social protections and family rights for military personnel apply to members of volunteer detachments.
South of the current fighting, the extent of the flooding caused by the breach in the Kakhovka Dam is widespread. Farmland that won't be growing food this year, and roads that are turned into rivers. Yolo David, CGTN.
Our correspondent Dasha Chernysheva is in Moscow now. So the Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin had refused to sign a contract with the Chechen Special Forces group. What can we read into this?
Well, certainly the Russian Ministry of Defense has made an announcement that every volunteer detachment that is involved in the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine, as Moscow describes it, should sign a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, this move, according to Moscow, is believed to increase the effectiveness of the Russian military. The head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has long been criticizing the heads of Russia's Ministry of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, and the General Gerasimov, who is is involved into the ongoing special military operation. And he said in his statement that Wagner fighters would not sign any contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. The reason, he said, was that to preserve the effectiveness of his fighters, he said his group was subordinate of Russia's national interest and was obeying by the orders given by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So he said the group of the Wagner mercenaries would never obey by the orders of Sergei Shoigu. So we have seen at the same time the Chechen fighters of the Ahmad group signing those contracts, and the leader of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, has hailed this effort, saying that finally the fighters would have the same social benefits as the military. They will be provided with the financial aid should anyone die or get wounded in the ongoing military effort in Ukraine. So there have been mixed feelings about this order, but certainly the timing is of essence at this moment, as the Russian president has confirmed that the Ukrainian offensive is underway, and Ukraine has also confirmed that. So certainly at this moment it would be more important for Russia to gain the momentum and to have its all military united.
And Dasha, we have heard from President Putin as the country marks Russia Day. What does he have to say about the latest developments in Ukraine?
Well, the Russian president has congratulated Russians on its national day, the Day of Russia. He said it is the patriotism of the Russians and their devotion to the country that was important at this very difficult moment in Russia's history. He said that it is the unity that makes the foundation and helps the fighters, the participants of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. He has also visited the military hospital and was quoted as saying that the Ukrainian side keeps targeting the civilian areas in the areas close to the front line. So he said there was no military sense at all in those activities. But at the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense has been commenting on the ongoing operation, saying that Ukraine has persisted with its offensive on the Zaporizhia and Donetsk direction. But according to Moscow, there was no success with Russian forces repelling those attacks. At the same time, they also say they have hit the Ukrainian reserves, the place where they are located, with high-precision weapons.
Dasha Chernysheva in Moscow, many thanks.
Let's talk now to Dr. Pavel Felgenhauer, a defense analyst based in Moscow. Pavel, welcome back to the program. Good to see you. Can I just pick up with something our correspondent was talking about there, Russia's defense minister ordering all volunteer detachments to sign a contract with the ministry. Wagner's boss refusing to sign the contract with the Chechen Special Forces Group. What do you read into that?
Well, it seems that the defense ministry chiefs and President Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu decided that this is the right moment to put the Wagner group into some kind of form of submission, or suppress their very public anti-Shoigu stance, that right now the Russian forces are showing not bad results in resisting the Ukrainian offensive, and the Wagner forces have been spent to a large extent in the fighting in Bakhmut, so they're not so needed right now. So now it's time to check them and demand that they declare loyalty and sign a contract. If they don't, that means they can be pushed out of the picture. So that's most likely the main reason.
Let's talk about this offensive. Ukraine saying it's liberated 4 villages in the southeast of the country, what it calls the first victories of this much-anticipated counter-offensive. How significant do you think they are?
Well, the Ukrainians are pressing forward, that's sure. Their success and gains have been rather minimal. They didn't break through the Russian lines, but they still have the initiative. And that's the Russians' military prepared to meet them and modified, well, their tactics and strategy. But still, there are problems for both sides. There's a lot of force that both sides will still throw into this battle. And up to now, the Russian forces have been rather passive. They're not counterattacking energetically. That's not very good for the future. But again, this is just the beginning of a very long summer campaign, a vicious summer campaign, and both sides will throw everything they have into the battle.
Is it possible that Russia already is throwing everything it has into this battle, and this is the way it is?
I don't believe both sides still have reserves. This is just the beginning of the summer campaign.
What have the last few days shown us, if anything, about Ukraine's tactics in this conflict?
Well, it's well known that the finest military plans go to trash as soon as you meet the enemy in the field. The Russian military are a formidable military. They're not spent at all, and they are ready.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. We seem to have a break-up on the line there. I should tell you there's a huge thunderstorm over London at the moment, which may have taken that feed out. But I think we got the gist of what Dr. Pavel Felgenhauer was saying, our guest in Moscow.
NATO has begun what it calls an unprecedented show of strength with its largest ever military air exercises in Europe.
The German-led Air Defender 2023 is a display of unity against potential threats to the security alliance.
Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Berlin. So, Trent, what did these drills consist of?
Well, Paul, it is a very public display of NATO's military might over the skies of Europe. We know this has been planned now for some time. 250 combat aircraft are taking part from 25 different nations. As you said, more than 10,000 military personnel. It is an enormously large logistical operation for both the German military, who are leading all of this, but also many other allied nations who have come to take part. We know from what we've been told from military briefings is that there's a number of key areas that they are wanting to do drills on, including air defence and protecting ground troops, missile interception. We know there's also anti-submarine warfare taking place, as well as, crucially, airfield evacuation measures. Now, we've been told that that was a late addition to the list of activities they would be doing, in large part because of many of those scenes that we saw in the fall of Kabul, where the evacuation clearly just did not go very well from NATO's perspective. So a lot of training to be done. As I say, a huge logistics operation. The lion's share of the aircraft are coming from the United States. Of the 250 taking part, 100 have been deployed from the US, but the Germans have been very keen to stress that this is an initiative that they are leading. I should also mention that there are 3 specific zones in which these exercises are taking place. One in the east of Germany, one in the south, and also one over the North Sea. During those particular training exercises, which are staggered, civilian aircraft are being told to not come in within that area. For that reason, there is an expectation that there could be disruption over the next 10 days to European air traffic. The German Air Force says they are trying to minimise it, but some airlines are already telling passengers to check ahead with their flights to make sure that there's no cancellations or delays.
And Trent, how much has the war in Ukraine played a role in the planning of these drills?
Well, I think it's played a pretty crucial role in the latter stages of the planning, and the reason I say that is because it was first conceived back in 2018, this initiative. So it's been in the works for some time, but of course Europe looked very different back in 2018. So what was then scenario planning is starting to feel, I think, a little bit more real for many of those military planners, especially those from places like Poland and the Baltics, given what has happened in Ukraine. Now, we know that the central theme and the message that's trying to be sent here is one of deterrence, but also one of showing what a response to Article 5 would look at. Now, Article 5, as you might recall, is that quite crucial piece of NATO doctrine which says an attack on one is an attack on all. Military planners have been saying These drills are about showing what would happen in the unthinkable event that NATO was attacked, how all those European countries would work very rapidly and quickly together in response to that. But the war in Ukraine, I think, is certainly hanging over this. We've heard actually from the US ambassador to Germany, Amy Gutmann. She's spoken in the past few hours, and she said, and I'll quote here, "In the face of Putin's brutal war against Ukraine, such training in these exercises is more important than ever." Paul.
Thanks for that, Trent. Trent Murray there in Berlin.
The billionaire financier and philanthropist George Soros is handing control of his $25 billion empire to his son Alex. Despite always vowing he would never turn over control of his Open Society foundations to his children, he said the 37-year-old has earned it. Soros is a major backer of liberal causes, and Alex says he plans not only to continue, but broaden those donations.
A court in Hamburg is hearing a lawsuit brought by a woman against Germany's BioNTech after she allegedly suffered side effects from its COVID-19 vaccine. It's the first of potentially hundreds of similar cases. The woman, who opted to remain anonymous, is seeking $160,000 in damages. To succeed, lawyers must prove the jab caused more harm than benefit. BioNTech insists the case has no merit.
The leading UK hedge fund, O'Day Asset Management, has denied considering imposing exit restrictions on investors in any of its funds. This comes as the firm seeks to prevent an investor exodus in the wake of sexual misconduct allegations against the founder, Crispin O'Day. O'Day denies all accusations but has left the company. The firm has announced plans to change its name as the fallout continues.
And you're watching CGTN. Still ahead. We're off to the United States next, where all eyes are on the Fed and their next rates decision on Wednesday.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. US investors are preparing for a week of key economic data.
Amid fears of a looming recession, the Federal Reserve will announce whether it's raising interest rates on Wednesday. Let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett, watching markets in New York. John, some analysts think the Fed will keep interest rates unchanged on Wednesday. What's the thinking behind that?
Yes. Well, it's funny the way these things go, isn't it? Last week we didn't have almost any economic news whatsoever, and in this coming week we've got some very, very key data coming up. Some of it is likely to shape the thinking of the central bank when they make their decision on interest rates, and some of it actually comes too late for the central bank. But the prevailing mood, I would say, is for an interest rate pause when the central bank meets on Wednesday. Now, don't hold me to that, okay? I'm just telling you what they tell me here, all right? It may be that they do actually increase increase interest rates, but the prevailing mood is that they will pause them. And they've been doing it, hiking interest rates since March of last year. So what is that, 14 months now? It may well be time to test the water and see what happens. I will tell you this, though. There was some caution this morning early on when we got going, because, of course, people realize here that tomorrow, Tuesday, we get the next very, very significant piece of data, and that is CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. And this is basically how much more Americans are paying in the stores and the gas stations month over month and year over year. And it has become the signature piece of data, even more important than the jobs data, since the COVID situation happened a couple of years ago. Anyway, so CPI comes out on Tuesday, 12:30 GMT, so that's early in the morning for us here in New York and also in Washington, D.C., and I'm thinking that we may see an overall softening. But then when I dig into the numbers for you tomorrow, we're probably going to see that the service sector remains elevated. We're going to see wages still pretty elevated. That's the key thing that the central bank is looking for, those wages to come down a little bit, a few percentage points. And, of course, job creation is still very, very strong, as we saw a couple of weeks ago. And it's really weird, actually, because people are screaming in America at the moment that they can't get enough people to work in restaurants and stores and that kind of stuff. So we have this job creation on the one hand, millions of jobs open, nobody seems to want to work anymore. It's all very, very peculiar. Anyway, the central bank will decide at 18 hours GMT on Wednesday, and then on Thursday comes another significant piece of data, retail sales, of course, what people are actually spending in the stores and on websites. Now, it has been slowing down lately, but we've also got consumer sentiment coming out on Friday, and that is where they ask people in the University of Michigan, they get together and they say, how do you feel about your economic future? How do you feel about the country under the present administration? All of that kind of stuff. And the last time they asked them, sentiment was down to a 6-month low. So that's the week that we've got to look forward to. The markets are up at the moment, but they're a bit better than they were. The Dow is up 50 points, the Nasdaq 94, S&P 500 is up 14 points. Last week, the S&P exited bear market territory, which means it's up now more than 20% from its low of a couple of months ago. The S&P has been green for 4 weeks in a row, the Nasdaq for 7. And the dollar is strengthening at the moment as well, all of which would suggest probably a 25 basis point increase when the Federal Reserve meets on Wednesday. So in other words, once again, nobody has any idea.
Nobody has any idea, but I will ask you anyway, even if you've got no idea. I mean, most big Wall Street banks think there will be a base rise next month instead. So why the pause?
Yeah. Well, here's the theory. I think because, you know, if they were going to actually hike by 25 basis points on Wednesday, I think we would have heard, because the members of the committee go into purdah for a week or two before they make that decision, when they're not allowed to speak. But before that, they really, really, really do speak. And we got mixed signals from them. But again, the prevailing sense was that there would be a pause. Now, the thinking is, you know, we've been doing this since March of last year. Obviously, rising interest rates are hurting a lot of people, even though they're bringing down inflation, which it could be argued hurts them even more. The point is, if they pause in June, which the people here certainly would like to see, if things all go awry, then they can come back in July and raise interest rates by 25 basis points or 50 basis points, or whatever they think they need to do. Now, they don't meet in August. They'll be back again in September. So it's a good testing period, really. They could pause in June and then hit us again in July if they need to. Now, there is just some talk around that we're going to get to 6% as a terminal rate rather than the 5% that we're kind of hovering at the moment. But it all comes back to this word that Americans love, that nobody else uses, which is a bifurcated economy. It means a twin-speed economy. You know, there's signs of a slowdown. There's signs of growth. Some people are doing really well. Other people are really struggling. Job creation is at a fantastic level of 337,000 jobs created in the month of May, just a couple of weeks ago when it was announced. And the recession that we've been talking about for a year never seems to get here. So it's all very confusing, really. The one thing I will leave you with, though, as we enter this week, there is a banking crisis in the background to all of this. Now, the regional bank crisis we reported on a couple of weeks ago may have died down, but I think there is a sense that the banks are going to tighten up their lending, partly because they feel they have to, partly because they want to, and that is going to do the job of several basis points of increase by the Federal Reserve. So that's why the pause is most likely tomorrow on Wednesday. But don't hold me to it, okay? I'm not prepared to reside on this one, or eat my hat if I'm wrong.
You're never wrong, but we will get you to eat your hat if you are. John, lovely to see you. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Now, homelessness in some of America's largest cities is a growing problem.
But now some charities say they're becoming overwhelmed as the number of people without homes reaches levels not seen since the Great Depression. Our correspondent Jody Jacobs reports now from New York.
Day in and day out, this is the line outside the New York Common Pantry, a sign of New York's homelessness crisis.
In the past 3 or 4 years, it's become really a lot. It's humongous, if I can use that word. I've never seen so many homeless people in my life. You know, I've lived here all my life. I've been here on Earth in New York City for a long time, and I've never seen so many people sleeping in the streets. I've never seen so many people on the subway sleeping.
Bernard Jenkins comes here every week. He comes here for a shower and to get something to eat. Jenkins has been homeless for close to 2 years.
Each and every day I have a goal to breathe and make it through the day. That's a blessing. Just to make it through the day, and not only that, but also to wake up in the morning.
Jenkins has spent many nights on the streets of New York. He now drifts, moving from city shelter to city shelter.
I had to give up. I kept looking for side jobs, you know what I mean, jobs that will help, you know, something that will put money in my pocket.
Homelessness in New York City, according to one study, suggests that it's reached the highest levels since the Great Depression of the 1930s. In December 2022, close to 70,000 people were homeless, among them some 20,000 children. New York City, unlike many other U.S. cities, has a right to shelter law. This means the aid, care and support of the homeless are public concerns and shall be provided for by the state. But the city's main shelters are overrun. Advocates say demand is 39% higher than it was 10 years ago. The city says an influx of migrants is exacerbating the problem. When there's no space, people end up on the street. Homelessness is often associated with mental health, but some experts say the link is exaggerated.
It only takes 1 or 2, a small percent of homeless people to act out. They're either in the throes of drug addiction or psychotic and hearing voices and reacting to those. That often becomes the face of the homeless. It is not the true face of the homeless, but the media goes along with this and feeds this kind of frenzy.
Many non-profit organizations like this one say they won't stop supporting the homeless, albeit with resources that are increasingly stretched. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
You can get the highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a win for pro-European parties in Montenegro's snap election. We'll have the latest.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories again. Modest advances with the much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village.
Our other headlines: a Chechen military unit signs a deal with Russia in Moscow's latest attempt to take control of mercenary armies.
And a show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever military air exercise, led by Germany.
The Europe Now movement has won Montenegro's parliamentary snap election according to the preliminary results.
The pro-EU party, which also wants stronger ties with neighbouring Serbia, must now find coalition partners. Leader Milojko Spajic said he would talk with any parties who share the Europe Now movement's values in a bid to form a pro-European government. The economy and cost of living dominated this election, unlike previous elections, which focused on whether Montenegro should align itself with the EU or with Russia. Let's talk now to CGTN correspondent Peter Oliver, who's in the capital, Podgorica. Peter, how likely is it that the winning party can form a coalition government?
It's going to be tough. That's certainly what we're going to see. Neither of the parties that came out in the top end of the vote that was held on Sunday got enough to form anywhere close to a majority by themselves. They also didn't get enough votes to be able to form a very simple or easy coalition. It is going to be a long and probably very tough process to do this indeed. Europe Now got the most votes, 26% or so they picked up. Now, what their main policies are is, as well as getting wages up, pensions up, sorting out lowering hours in the working day and building infrastructure and moving Montenegro's economy away from being solely reliant upon Adriatic coast tourism. They want to see Montenegro join the European Union. Now, the party they have most in common with when it comes to that is the Democratic Party of Socialists, who head up a coalition group called Together. The problem there is the Together movement and Europe Now, they don't agree on anything else apart from the fact that Montenegro should join the European Union. And we heard from Milojko Spajic last night telling us he has already said who he's not going to work with, and that hasn't changed. DPS, the Democratic Party of Socialists, they're on that list of people he's not going to work with. It's also unlikely that he's going to work with the current Prime Minister going into these elections. That's Dritan Abazovic, who heads up the URA grouping in the Parliament. So if they're going to put together a government, how stable that government is going to be is going to have huge questions over it. It's more than likely would be a minority government. How much they're going to be able to achieve with that, we are going to have to wait and see. Europe Now does have the presidency, of course, here in Montenegro. You've got to remember, Jakov Milatovic was voted in 3 months ago as he took over from the president who'd been in charge for the last 30 years, for the last 29 years, I beg your pardon, who was from the Democratic Party of Socialists. It's going to be a tough task, though, if we're going to see Milojko Spajic. He was announced to the stage last night as the new Prime Minister of Montenegro. Whether he gets to take on that role, we'll have to wait and see, but it is going to be a long road ahead before we get to see a new functioning government here in the country.
OK, and the World Bank expected Montenegro's GDP to grow 3.4% this year. What are the prospects for that now?
You've got to remember the World Bank put out a similar prediction just last week when this campaign for the election was in full swing. It was a campaign filled with enmity. We were almost certain to be in the situation that we are in right now last week. So the World Bank has faith. Of course, over 3% growth. You look at some of the countries in Europe, I'm looking at Germany, I'm looking at others as well, they would take your hand off for growth of that level. It seems like that will continue at the moment, but the longer Montenegro goes without a stable, functioning government, well, we know that business loathes a vacuum, and that's what you're getting at the moment with that uncertainty that comes from not having a stable government. The longer it goes on, it will have a knock-on effect, surely. So the sooner Montenegro can get some kind of functioning government in the Parliament building just behind me, the better for everybody concerned here.
OK, Peter, thank you very much indeed for that. That's Peter Oliver reporting from Podgorica.
The European Union is considering offering Tunisia nearly $1 billion in aid to shore up its struggling economy.
The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Tunis could receive the payment once necessary agreement is found. The potential aid offer comes amid concerns that economic instability in Tunisia could make a growing migrant and refugee crisis even worse.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Mark Webster, in Brussels. Mark, give us more detail about this aid offer from the EU.
Well, the facility on offer splits broadly into three categories. The first and biggest is some 900 million euros, which they say is for macroeconomic support. Now, as you alluded to there in the introduction, that means basically the Tunisian economy is shot and it desperately needs to put back on track, because if it's not, there will obviously be more and more social unrest, and the warning to the EU and to the folk who run the institution behind me was that you will then make this crisis even worse. Now, the second bit of money, 100 million euros, is meant to cover emergency aid for the budget. The other thing is that Tunisia has turned around and had a look, and it's got a big black hole in that budget, which again, if the money isn't given by somebody, then there will be cuts to programmes, which again could fuel social unrest. The third part, and this is the bit that I think is of most interest to the European Union in the current state of affairs, is more than 100 million euros, which would go to shore up the border patrols, would go to shore up anti-people smuggling rings, and would try as much as possible to stop a further influx of refugees and migrants coming over to countries like Italy and Greece in another summer mad dash. And this is what Ursula von der Leyen, the President Commission, had to say about that.
So we will work together on an anti-smuggling operational partnership, and we will support Tunisia with border management. This year, the European Union will provide 100 million euros to Tunisia for border management, but also for search and rescue and anti-smuggling and return. The objective is to have a holistic approach to migration policy rooted in the respect for human rights.
Mark, it sounds like what used to be called carrot and stick politics. What's been the response from Tunisia's president?
Spot on, and they preferred the carrot to the stick. There's no doubt about that. What they're saying is, you've got to help us, because otherwise you will fuel a migrant crisis. You know, we do need the money. We recognise you need the money. The problem comes with what are the provisions and provisos that are attached to those loans. Now, there's a completely separate agreement which has been ongoing, which currently is on hold, with the International Monetary Fund. That is for $1.9 billion of assistance to the Tunisian economy. Now, the president decided that he was going to postpone that for a while, because what they were asking for in return was some fairly significant reforms to the way the Tunisian economy is run. Now, what the president said, well, look, you know, if, for instance, you insist on us privatising state-owned industries, you know, while that might look good to you and it might reduce the amount of budget we spend on this, it could also fuel unemployment. If you have higher unemployment, you're going to have higher social unrest. If you have higher social unrest, you could well have more migrants wanting to head towards Europe. So he said in no uncertain terms, if you really do want to help us, don't attach stringent conditions to the loan, because you'll only make our domestic situation even worse. If you want to end the crisis with migrants and refugees, then you're going to have to give us the money so we can put our economy right and make sure that this is a place where they want to stay. or you'll see a large migration of people towards you, the very problem you said you wanted to overcome.
Mark, thank you for that. Our correspondent Mark Webster in Brussels.
The former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died at the age of 86.
Berlusconi was the country's longest-serving premier and continued to be an influential figure in Italian politics even after his term ended. Aside from his political career, the colourful self-made billionaire built a media empire, was never far from corruption allegations, and often in the middle of some rather lurid sex scandals.
Let's talk to our correspondent, Giles Gibson, in Rome. Giles, he was a divisive, a controversial figure. How will he be remembered in Italy?
Well, there are thunderstorms rolling through the Italian capital as we speak, and Italians with different political affiliations, I suppose, will interpret that in different ways. But Matteo Renzi, another former Italian Prime Minister, I think put it very succinctly in his tweet just minutes after the news was announced. He said, "Many loved him and many hated him," about Berlusconi, and that really encapsulates that extraordinary sweep of Berlusconi's life, going from being a singer on cruise ships when he was a young man to building a billionaire's fortune in media as well as construction and football, owning AC Milan, and then becoming Italian Prime Minister on 3 separate occasions. But I think also, internationally speaking, some of his scandals, some of his negative headlines are going to be hanging over his legacy for many years to come, chief amongst those the so-called bunga parties that he used to hold at his villa in Milan or just outside Milan. He was actually convicted of having or of paying for sex from a woman who was under 18 at the time in relation to one of those bunga parties. That conviction was later overturned on appeal, but I think for many people around the world, that is perhaps what they will remember Silvio Berlusconi for his proximity to scandal over the years.
And he changed the political landscape in Italy, didn't he? What will his death mean now for Italian politics with his Forza Italia party in the governing coalition?
Yeah, we certainly had that recognition of his impact on Italian politics from the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. She put out a video statement saying that Berlusconi taught Italy not to accept limits imposed by others. His Forza Italia party, as you're indicating, is part of the current governing coalition, and they are going to have to choose a new leader in the coming days. There is speculation that the Foreign Minister, Antonio Tajani, could be the one to try and fill that void left by Silvio Berlusconi amongst the party that he founded. And there's also talk of one of Berlusconi's children, Marina Berlusconi, stepping in and taking on the leadership of the party that her father founded. But the next few days, really, it's going to be about remembrance of his allies getting together to remember Silvio Berlusconi. He's going to have a state funeral in Milan on Wednesday at Il Duomo Cathedral, the very famous cathedral in central Milan. And there's also been a national day of mourning declared across the country as well.
Giles Gibson reporting from Rome with a thunderstorm rolling overhead. Thank you very much indeed for that.
Well, Gian Giacomo Calovini is an MP for the right-wing populist Brothers of Italy party, which makes up the biggest group in the governing coalition. I asked him what Berlusconi's legacy might be.
I think that we have to remember about him in a many different view. If I can, we have to remember that, for example, the president of Repubblica Mattarella just said a few minutes ago that Silvio Berlusconi is a great political leader who marked the history of our republic. I think that in every part of the world we have to think about him like a leader that changed many things in our country and not only in our country.
What was it about him that appealed so many times to Italian voters?
That's because probably for the charisma and his skills as like an entrepreneur that is able to create in the Italians the feeling with the other country, with the population. And so that probably because for so many years, we vote him and his party.
I wonder how much did Silvio Berlusconi set out the road for international politicians who came after him? I'm thinking about people like Donald Trump and even perhaps Boris Johnson. How much did he set up international politics for men like them to succeed later on?
Yes, I think it could link about Johnson or Donald Trump, because for the character, for the power with the communication with the people. But I think that he had a very deep impact for the international level and for the international policy. I'm thinking, for example, of the declaration in Rome and the famous handshake between Berlusconi, Bush and Putin. Obviously, we are in a different period, and it is impossible to think something like that with Putin in this period. But probably he has given Italy a central role and visibility in international level, very important.
You're watching CGTN, still to come. Manchester City's journey to winning one of football's most coveted titles, and why the net may be closing in on their finances.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe. Manchester City Football Club is preparing for an open-top bus parade through Manchester City Centre later today.
City's victory in the Champions League final on Saturday meant they became only the second English team to win the treble, which is the Premier League, FA Cup and the European Cup, all in a single season. Well, CGTN Siobhan McCall has been following the story.
So, Siobhan, Manchester City's success on the pitch is fueling success, commercial success, branding success off the pitch too, isn't it?
Yes, that's right, Paul. City's reward for winning the treble, a staggering $353 million in prize money. That's the most a club has ever received in a single season. And just to put that figure into context, City's total revenue in 2022 was $780 million, so it's just under half of that. Abu Dhabi United Group bought Manchester City in 2008. They're owned by Sheikh Mansour, who is part of the Abu Dhabi royal family and also the current vice president of the United Arab Emirates. And his project, his vision, has really come to fruition in the last few years. Let's take a look at the most valuable brands in world football in 2022. You can see Manchester City up there in second, Real Madrid, the Spanish powerhouse, up there in first. We're going to fast forward now by 12 months and look at that. Manchester City, the most valuable brand in world football, $1.5 billion in brand revenue. So how has that happened? Because, you know, Real Madrid, they have a huge fan base. They are probably the best supported club in the world. They've got glittering history, but it's Manchester City who are top. Obviously, success on the pitch helps, but it's also the fact that City have really worked hard at growing their brand globally, and particularly in the US and in Asia. Let's take a look at City's social media following. 45.1 million followers on Instagram. That's the sixth most of any football club in the world. And also on TikTok, only Manchester United are higher at them. This has really been helped by the fact that they have gone on pre-season tours to Asia and also to the United States. So what next for City? Well, obviously, they want to get more success, they want more trophies, but a bit of a blow for them today, and that's the fact that, according to reports, their manager Pep Guardiola, who has been so instrumental to their success, he's planning to step down from his role when his contract expires in 2 years' time. So they've got a bit of time, but it is big boots to fill.
And there's more buts, aren't there? Because despite all of that marvellous success, there is a rather large black cloud hanging over the club.
Yes, you're right, Jamie. As City fans celebrated on Saturday, rival fans were quick to point out the fact that Manchester City have 115 financial fair play breach charges hanging over them. This is a Premier League investigation that's been going on for 4 years, and it relates to the period 2009 to 2018. So the investigation alleges that City did not give a fair reflection of their sponsorship deals, their operating costs and their revenue. I should probably say that City deny any wrongdoing. They say they were surprised when the charges were released, and they say they are taking a legal challenge. But we have been here before with Manchester City. In 2020, they were banned from European competition because they were found to have misled UEFA, who is the European football governing body, and also broken their financial fair play rules. That case went to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. It was overturned. So we don't have a timescale when this one's going to happen, but what we do know is that if City are found guilty, they could be expelled, relegated from the Premier League. But with the parade ongoing, I think it's safe to say that their fans and their players won't be thinking about that tonight, but it is lingering in the background for the club.
Lucky they're not doing their open-top bus tour in London, because it's chucking it down at the moment. I'm sure it's gorgeous and sunny in Manchester. Siobhan, thank you very much.
We'll be having a lot of fun, for sure.
Siobhan McCall, thank you.
Thanks, Siobhan. Well, Kieran Maguire is an expert in football finance at the University of Liverpool, and he joins us now. So, Kieran, good to see you. We've been hearing about Manchester City being named the most valuable brand in world football. How did the club achieve this, and how important is it?
Well, as far as commercial partners are concerned, they want to be associated with success. With Manchester City winning the Premier League for 5 seasons out of the last 6 and just winning the Champions League this weekend, clearly that is of great benefit, because you want your product seen alongside the big trophies. I think Manchester City have been clever in the sense that they have targeted individual markets. They don't necessarily have the same fan base in some of the countries which are difficult to monetize the level of support, but they don't worry too much about it. It's the brands that matter, and Manchester City is now a leading brand as far as commercial partners and the commercial world are concerned.
So you mentioned the fan base globally not being what other clubs have. City still lagging behind Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United even. Do you think that they can ever get that level of global fan engagement?
I think it will take a long period of time. This is their first Champions League. If it's their only Champions League, then I think they are unlikely to catch up. And you have to take into consideration that many of the legacy fans of the other clubs that you've mentioned, they're not going to change their support. So what Manchester City have to do is to make themselves attractive to a new generation of fans who are coming through. And that's going to be on the basis of the quality of the players and the quality of the football that they play. The likes of Manchester United and Barcelona and Real Madrid have huge legacy achievements, and they can never be ignored. They've often had the world's best players. You've only got to look at the likes of George Best, Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo. If Haaland stays at Manchester City for 4 or 5 years, then potentially he could become the leading player as far as social media is concerned, and Manchester City can benefit from that.
And Kieran, what do you make about these financial fair play charges? How damaging could they be for the brand?
I think brands will take an appropriate view when the final judgment comes out. We've seen brands such as Tiger Woods and Lance Armstrong suffer when they were subject to negative press releases and negative sanctions. So as far as Manchester City's partners in the Abu Dhabi region are concerned, I don't see that being an issue unless, of course, the owners walk away from the club. Other brands are more likely to be checking the small print of their arrangements in case they feel that they might be guilty by association should Manchester City lose the charges.
Kieran, great to get your thoughts. Many thanks indeed. That's Kieran Maguire from the University of Liverpool.
And from footy to film, while many of the movie world's big names are flying to Shanghai for the city's film festival, one famous Chinese film director is travelling to Europe to promote his work.
That's right. After events in Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, Xie Fei has been welcomed in Greece. And our correspondent Evangelos Sipsas had a front row seat.
The Girl from Hunan, a film by award winner Xie Fei about a young girl who was forced into an arranged marriage. Although filmed in the 80s, it was showcased last week here in the seaside city of Volos in central Greece. The Cinematic Arts and Diversity event was organized by the Confucius Institute and the Chinese Cultural Center of Athens, and it was the first of its kind since the pandemic. Its aim was to promote people-to-people and cultural exchanges through art.
Now we enjoy the movies more today than we did in the past. Nowadays there are translations of the movies I have directed, so it's easier for the audience to understand and connect to them. And through the translations there is an exchange of cultures with people, now being able to understand a bit more of Chinese culture.
The aim of the event was to promote Sino-Greek ties, as well as highlight some of the similarities between the two countries.
The showcase of the film is presented here so Greeks can understand a bit more about Chinese culture, but mostly to realize how similar we both are and how we can have stronger mutual interaction.
And the two countries have been influencing each other's cinematic development for over half a century.
Ever since modern Greek cinematography was established around the early 70s, with its most known director, Theodoro Agolopoulos, it always had close ties with Asian culture and specifically China. Especially that director has influenced the Chinese cinema culture.
The economic ties between China and Greece are well known, thanks to the high-profile Belt and Road flagship projects like the Port of Piraeus. But cinema offers a different way of bringing the two countries closer together through creative cooperation and understanding. One of the attractions of events like this for directors like Xie Fei is the opportunity to highlight challenging subjects, such as an arranged marriage, in a way that the audiences can relate to. With events like this becoming increasingly popular in Greece, Xi is planning to showcase more of his films across the country. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The headlines again. Modest advances with the much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village.
A Chechen military unit signs a deal with Russia in Moscow's latest attempt to take control of mercenary armies.
And a show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever military air exercise led by Germany.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.